All right, here we're going to be talking about order of operations while we're using fractions. If you're not comfortable using fractions, you can change these into decimals. Actually, that's really what a fraction is. It's just a division problem that changes it into a decimal. I'd be really careful about that, like just changing everything into a decimal in the beginning, because especially actually if you look at the first one, we have a 1/3. 1 divided by 3 gives us a repeating decimal, 0.3 repeating. And if you round that, it's not going to give you the exact answer that you want. Okay, so we don't really want to change it into a decimal until we really need to. Okay, you don't actually want to do that division problem until you actually need to use it, because the calculator will keep all of those repeating 3's in there, and then you could just do that times whatever we get. That's supposed to be multiplication. You could really just do whatever you get from that times whatever comes out of that parentheses. If you change it into a decimal right away, you're going to have to round it, and it's not going to give you exactly what you want. Okay. Still have to follow GEMDAS here. We still have to follow our order of operations. So we have to do inside the parentheses first. So we're going to do everything in there, and we're going to follow order of operations inside of there. So we have to do this multiplication first. We have subtraction and we have multiplication. We have to multiply 1/4 times 12. So you could do 1 divided by 4 to give you that as a decimal. So you get 1 divided by 4, that's 0.25. Don't rewrite that. You know you're about to use that in multiplication. So just use that in the multiplication right away. Don't clear that out of the calculator at all. Just do this number times 12. You do 1 divided by 4, that changes that into a decimal, and then immediately just hit times 12. So we have 1/3. Still outside the parentheses, 9 minus whatever we get from that multiplication. That's really just 3. That changes to 3. 9 minus 3, we're going to keep working inside the parentheses. 9 minus 3 is 6. And then 1/3, this is the exact same thing that I was saying before. 1 divided by 3 gives us 0.3 repeating. If you write that down and then do multiplication, it's going to give us something close to the right answer, but not exactly. Let's just do 1 divided by 3. That gives us the 0.3 repeating in the calculator, and don't clear that out of the calculator. Just hit times what we got from the parentheses. That's 6. Times 6 would give us exactly 2. If you got 1.98, that means you're rounding it. That's not what we really want. It's exactly 2. All right, on the next one, I'm just going to do the odd problems. I'm going to do the left side. You'll do the right side on your own. So again, we can change those all into decimals right away. I wouldn't change them into decimals until I'm actually ready to use them, though. So I have a grouping symbol here, but there's really not much to do inside of there except for changing that fraction into a decimal. So I'm actually going to use the other grouping symbol first. I'm going to do inside of there first. 1/4 times 8/5 doesn't change, minus 3 times 1/4 is 0.25. Don't know why that happened. 0.25. And 1/2 is just 0.5. This one you might want to change into decimals and then subtract them. So you can do 0.25 minus 0.5. That would give us negative 0.25. Now we have 2 multiplication problems to do. This becomes a little bit trickier to keep all this stuff in the calculator. 1 divided by 4, you should already know that that's 0.25. 8 divided by 5, I would change that into a decimal also. I can comfortably write that as a decimal because I know it's not a repeating decimal. That's 1.6. Minus 3 times negative 0.25. Alright, so I now have multiplication, subtraction, and another multiplication. I'm going to do this left to right. I'm going to do 0.25 times 1.6. That gives me 0.4 minus 3 times negative 0.25. This is a negative 3 times a negative 0.25. Negative 3 times negative 0.25 is a positive 0.75. That's how I'm going to write it. I'm going to write it as a plus 0.75. So I have 0.4 plus 0.75. Now I can actually do the addition. That's my last step. That'll give me 1.15. You don't need to know how to change that into a fraction. You should know how to turn that into a fraction. But if you want to leave it as a decimal, you can. If you wrote your answer as a fraction, that's perfectly okay too. You definitely need to be able to recognize multiple choice options that are the same as that. So you'd have to be able to recognize that this is really 1 3/20, or 23 over 20. Those are all the same thing. I'm okay accepting answers as fractions or decimals, but you have to recognize that those are the same thing. All right, our last one has a fraction inside of the parentheses and an exponent on the outside of that. We have a fraction or a division problem inside of there. If this is not a repeating fraction, sorry, repeating decimal, then I'm comfortable writing it just as a decimal there. I'm just changing that 1/2 into 0.5, and then I'm going to square it. If it's a repeating decimal, like we see on this one, do all of this in the same step. Instead of writing this down, square the number that you get in the calculator. Do 1 divided by 3 and just square it right away. And then actually, in this problem, you'd also have multiplication. You could do that next. Without clearing out the calculator, you can do that decimal, that repeating decimal, times negative 81. If you want to write it down, if you feel more comfortable doing that, you have to just show that it's a repeating decimal, and then when you type it back into the calculator, type in as many, it's going to be 0.1 repeating, type in as many ones as you possibly can, and it'll give you close to the right answer, close to the right whole number, but it won't get you exactly the right whole number. That's why I would just do all of this in the calculator. I would actually perform all of this in the calculator before clearing anything out, before writing anything down, because I can follow order of operations a little bit in my head. You can do in the parentheses, then you do your exponent, then you do your multiplication, and you just do all of that in the calculator. On the problem I'm showing you, I still want to square this 0.5. That's 5 minus 16. 0.5 squared is 0.25. Now I have subtraction, and I have multiplication. So I'm going to multiply next. 5 minus 16 times 0.5 is 4, and 5 minus 4 is just a positive 1.